Hello, everyone. Welcome to Personalization Outbreak Podcast number 17. Last week, we interviewed a Wall Street analyst and we asked how a consumer, student-centric approach to higher education could change the value equation. This week, we decided to go deeper into higher education with someone who has experiences in both worlds, Wall Street and higher education. Our guest, Adlai Wertman, is the David C. Bohnett Professor of Social Entrepreneurship at the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. He's also the founding director of the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab at Marshall, a university-wide center focused on educating and supporting USC students, faculty, staff, and community members on using business models to address global, social, environmental, and health challenges. Now, prior to joining the faculty at the Marshall School, Adlai spent 7 years as president and CEO of Chrysalis, the only nonprofit in Los Angeles devoted solely to helping the homeless change their lives through employment. After 18 years as an investment banker in New York and Los Angeles. Together, we will talk about the digital transformation that's happening in higher education and how the social unrest is impacting professors, faculty, and students. We will also discuss the challenges defining education as an investment that can have a tangible ROI measurement. Adlai will also be one of the 15 higher education guest speakers on day 3 of GLLG's 2020 Leadership in the Age of Personalization virtual summit that will take place on October 30th. Check it out. And thanks to our sponsorship, you can register free at 2020summit.ageofpersonalization.com. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Adlai, thank you, brother. Thanks for being here.
I would spend time with you, Glenn, under any circumstance, and I'm sorry we're not in the same room right now. That's a bummer.
It is a bummer. I wish I could hug you. And I know a lot of other people will feel that way too after listening to you. So I'm going to just start it off with a pop quiz, given the current climate, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And here's the statement I'd like for you to react to, Adlai. Knowing something's right isn't enough to start doing what's right, and knowing something's wrong isn't enough to stop doing
it? First of all, I'm the professor. I give the test, so not you. I think, I think people, Kahneman, I think, Nobel Prize winning economist, realized in a groundbreaking, and the reason he won a Nobel Prize, that people would rather make no decision than make the wrong decision. So he turned upside down this whole idea of economic man, the thing that all economics was built on, which is that we do everything only to the extent that it helps us. So we always could assume in all economics that greed was the motivating factor. And he actually said, no, we have it backwards. The motivating factor is actually a bigger motivating factor is not making a decision because of fear of doing something wrong. So I think that people get into their lane and they just stay in their lane. And I was mentioning, I was in traffic yesterday coming back from Colorado. And the question was, you could see who kept switching lanes and those people who said, thinking there was always a better one. And there were those people who just said, I'm in my lane, I'm going to stay in my lane. And I think everybody got a little angry at those people who left their lane. Right? It was sort of like, just, you're making me challenge myself at that goal. So I think that we all know what's right, or what we think is right. We all know what we're thinking is wrong, but still our innate humanity says, just do nothing. Keep doing what we're doing, right? Because especially doing something right is hard. I don't think stopping doing something wrong should be hard, okay? It tends to be hard in our economy because often doing something wrong can be highly profitable, right? So it's sort of hard in our world to stop doing wrong. But then the idea of doing right, I think that usually requires much more self-sacrifice.
So, I love where you're going. And again, you're always making me think. So I'm not a big fan of the word transformation. Why? Because if people were evolving in the right way, and if they made the right decisions when the time called for them, then we wouldn't have to transform. So why has this been such a big surge of transformation across large institutions? Is it because we didn't know when it was the time to do the right thing? Aren't we making it more complicated now by trying to do transformation with people that maybe aren't ready to do what's right?
I think, though, that these days we have no choice, right? While I'm not a believer that we're really hearing it from consumers, we are. We are definitely at the higher levels of employment, hearing it from our employees. Okay. You can look at what's been going on in Silicon Valley, what's been going on with Facebook and with Twitter. The pushback, to a great extent, started with employees, right, saying this is unacceptable to us. And the one place that we know that one of the research pieces that came out years ago that has really proven out again and again is that it is easier to recruit people and then easier to retain the people you recruit. Two very expensive things, right? If there's a feeling and a belief, now I'm just saying feeling and belief, that there's values alignment between you and your potential or your current employer, right? So therefore, that was less and less true. Plus, my as an employee willingness to express my values at work were never I could separate those two. In the last several years, that's over, right? There's a generation coming up that is not separating that, right? There are advertisers now who are pushed by that generation to not put up with it anymore, right? The idea that advertisers are boycotting Facebook because of who they're allowing to post is remarkable. So I think transformation is happening faster than any of us can imagine. Interestingly, I heard speakers the other day on education and higher ed after this, and the comment was, we're going to see more change in education, higher education, in the next 3 years than we have in the last 30. Because of what's happening here between us.
So what I hear from you is that what's been the driving force of transformation is that we have neglected the value of the individual. That as much as we may not want to accept it, consumers and employees are no longer just following old standardized ways of doing things. They don't want to be defined by a large institution, let alone a brand. And now institutions are recognizing this. And this is what's driving the transformation. So here's a question for you, Adlai. What is the new value equation in higher ed? It's historically been driven by the institution. And now we see that Google is now working with presidents from large institutions, and they're focused on delivering two messages. What is the student mindset and what is the parent mindset? What's the value equation now that it begins with the student and the parent?
It's very interesting way to look at it. So the assumption is that the parent is paying the tuition.
Yep.
And that the student is following their parents' direction. I think that, as you know, tuitions at private universities have gone up at a faster inflation rate than any other product in America. Nothing has risen. And now, you know, that 4% annual raise in tuition, when tuition is now $57,000 a year, that 4% is a new $2,500 a year. And the next thing you know, from 57 at 60, and from 60 at 63, we're not talking about incremental little changes. We're talking about unaffordable to an enormous number of people. So we had choices to make, right? And especially choices if we really want to use education as a way to rise up and to convert family trajectories for first generation or people coming out of communities that are not traditionally getting college educations in the past. Well, now, though, we're asking a first gen to spend $250,000 on tuition. Or even if they get a 3/4 scholarship, they're still in the whole 75 grand. So we had our choices. And the choices I believe that we've made in education is to say that the measurement of success for us and the purpose of the way to look at tuition is ROI. It didn't used to be like that. We had a lot of choices as to how to look at it. There was all this stuff about how college people made better leaders and you know, all of the traditional white male attitude of liberal arts education. But in truth, now the universities have said, no. I actually heard a senior financial aid officer the other day say, we tell parents not to think about it as spending money on tuition, but as an investment. So if we're going to say to students, hey, we're asking you to, or parents, we're asking you to invest money, to consider this an investment, then their response is always going to be, great, measure it for me. And the answer is, I measure investments by ROI. So therefore, we're going to tell you the numbers. Right? Here's the numbers for how much you will make after graduation versus what you spent. Right? So now, you know, I'm a big believer that we always focus all of our attention, and Glenn, you and I have talked about this, on what we measure.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever I measure is what I'm going to do. Right? And we've seen how looking, Glenn, you and I have had this conversation, how looking at different measurements changes the way we act in the first place. Right? I mean, you know, so once we've said as a university, we're going to measure ourselves by how much money you make afterwards, then suddenly I'm going to build a university around that. I'm going to build vocational schools. I mean, to a great extent, USC, which said for years that our biggest school was our arts and sciences school. Truth is if you take out the pre-meds and the basic science kids and look at the humanities majors, the people studying the traditional, what you went to college for, then you're looking at 7 to 10% of our graduating class. Where are they graduating from? Business school, engineering school, communications, pure vocational schools. But it makes sense to do that and to invest everything in your vocational schools if I'm going to measure how much your vocation is paying for how quickly you earn back your money that you invested on tuition. And then, I don't want to jump ahead, but the next step is, well, in that case, do I really need a 4-year education? If all I'm doing is going to vocational school, why am I taking all these extra courses? Right? Why am I, you've given me my business major in 70 credits. And then the rest of this is I get to do a second major or a minor and I have to take my general electives, my GEs, right? But the truth is if all I'm doing is going to grad school or going to undergrad for the business education, then I'll pay you for 70 credits and I'm out, not 140. And now we start to go, well, now are we going to design mini programs for very specific personalization? What is it that you want out of school? Two ways to increase ROI, right? How much money you make afterwards and how much you invested, right? So now the question is, let's lower the cost of investment. And if we can't do that by lowering tuition, let's just change the model.
So where do you think the model's headed based upon what you've said, or have you just described the new model or approach that people need to think about?
I think, there's two model changes. Model change number one is the easy one, delivery mechanism. And, from the fact that you and I and Scott are having this conversation right now over Zoom, I am about to, in a few hours, teach 75 students on Zoom. And the truth is, I've done two things. One is I've used what we now call a flipped classroom model. So everything, lecture, readings, all of that happens before they step into class. The minute they walk into class, everything is application of what they've heard. They do not need to sit in a room and hear me lecture. I can record that, and they can watch it anytime they want. When they're in the classroom, we're going to do breakout rooms and debate and applied education. So that's the one change, but that doesn't change the number of credits, or units, it's just the delivery mechanism. And I happen to like and dislike, but I find that Scott, you have to tell me that teaching online actually allows me to do things that I never could have done before and never would have done before in so many ways that I'm just discovering.
I think I'm the same way. I'm with you 100%. And I really love actually being in the spot where I am right now, because even colleagues, to be honest, that I thought were going to have some significant challenges with our just mass migration online last spring, really not only rose up to the occasion, but found themselves reinvigorated in many ways. And I'm not trying to paint it as the perfect solution. We fixed it and now higher ed's okay because we're online too. But I do see a lot of innovation from all areas of the faculty that I get to work with, and it's exciting, and I'm trying to do it myself. And I was just thinking, from your perspective, Adlai, could I compare the starting day syllabus and plan you had in January 2020 to the one you have right now on the last day of August? I know the way you think, you've always had more of a student-centric approach in your approach towards just understanding what education's about. So I'm curious as to how your class last year, or I should say last January, was already ahead of the curve in terms of more of a student-centric approach, and how did that even change besides just say a flip modality?
Thank you. Two things. First of all, I want to go back to what you mentioned about your colleagues.
Yeah.
I have polled my classes and asked them, polling, by the way, is one of these great things you can do on Zoom, and asked them, how many of your professors are delivering the education, like you could tell, did the work over the summer to re-deliver their classes in a different way than when they were in the classroom? And the answer was typically from each group about a third. Two-thirds of the professors said, if I stood up in front of the room and talked to you before, I'm going to stand up in the front of the room and talk to you now. And that was disappointing, but they're thinking, look, I'm going to be back in the classroom in 3 months or 6 months. What am I changing for? And those professors are going to be left behind. From my side, I started taking classes over the summer offered by USC on how to teach online.
Okay.
And we're talking 40, 50 hours of classes.
Wow.
That I took on how to teach online. I took multiple classes, especially when we added DEI to that, and how to, DEI was going to be hard to implement in a classroom, much harder when I can't read body language. I can't get feedback from the students. With 75 students, I have students on 3 pages of faces. I never see the second or the third page. And the third page is all blank names anyway. I then sat down at my syllabus and tore it up. I just ripped it up. I was like, this is not, I can't teach, this is not what I can teach now. And I spent, I think I mentioned in the past, I spent easily 100 hours this summer redoing 2 syllabi.
Yeah.
I mean, I just, from scratch, just ripped it out, and including my learning objectives, everything. I just started it all over again.
How did the learning objectives themselves change? Because, right, like, I mean, that's the one thing I think everyone, whether they're in education or not, can understand that, that's, you're basically putting forth the mission. Like, you come here, you spend some time with me and your classmates, and this is what we're going to do together. How did your objectives change? Did they change much at all? You said they did.
I think they changed in a few ways. One is I tightened them up.
Okay, how so?
Well, because I finally, I've been teaching, I've taught this same course that I'm teaching now for 16 years.
Okay.
2 or 3 times a year for 16 years. And you sort of get your syllabus, you change the readings, but you really don't reevaluate your entire course.
Yeah.
And what this allowed me to do is really reevaluate what I should be teaching students in 2020. Not just how do I teach it, but in thinking about how do I teach it, it had me roll all the way backwards. And even to say, was I really teaching to that learning objective? Like, I had it on there, but were students really leaving my classroom at the end of the semester knowing how to do X? They really weren't. So either I had a choice, redo my course so that they did learn how to do X, or admit that that was not actually a learning objective for the course. It was just on the list. And it was sort of I can't think of the right word right now. My brain's a little busted. But it was an iterative process.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right? It kept going back and forth. I would teach something. I would write a lesson plan for week 6 and go, I should rewrite that learning objective because it's not exactly written word for word exactly to what I'm doing. But then, right now, preparing for class tonight I've never prepared for a class this way.
But Adlai, let me jump into the preparation. Is it preparing based upon the mechanism for delivery, or are you rethinking what the learning objectives for your classes should be given the current state in society, or both?
Unfortunately, the latter has way more impact than I would have liked. I mean, I will be perfectly honest. I am afraid to walk into the classroom these days. I am afraid of my own students. And I have designed a course that protects me from them. I can't believe I'm saying this on a podcast, but we're at a point right now where cancel culture is extraordinarily rampant on college campuses. Where in the past I might have said something that was inappropriate and I could acknowledge it and apologize for it. Now I can assume I'm fired by the end of the day. I have a story that I heard the other day about a professor who said a word in another language in context, perfectly in context of the class, using an example of multiple languages having different words for the same thing, and used a word in another language that sounded like a racial slur, and was fired from that professor's class for that. The students, by the end of the class, had written a petition and gotten together, and the complaints happened, and that teacher no longer can teach that class. Why? Because he said a word in another language that sounded like a word that was offensive in this language. So I always joke that this year I'm walking into class where one word can get me fired. You know, my joke after I heard that was I didn't realize that word didn't even have to be in English. So we are all walking into class. I don't know, Scott, if you feel this way, but we're walking into classrooms literally with a gun to our head.
Wow.
Wow. I didn't realize that, that number one, that you felt that way. And number two, that it's, well, I guess it's just so, it's hypersensitive now on what really matters to the student. So this makes me feel that student centricity has accelerated even more. It's not just about their journey, but how we can even speak to them.
Right. And, you know, having a 26-year-old, a 25-year-old, and a 22-year-old that I live with, you know, my kids, I don't actually live with kids, but who are uber progressive, super progressive kids, I can't keep up with the language of the day.
Okay.
I mean, I'm 61 years old. Words are changing. Allowable words are changing by the day. I run my course. I will tell you, I run my course daily. Today, when I'm preparing for my course, I run it by my daughter.
Wow.
And I say, is there anything offensive in here? Is there anything that would offend? Now, I teach a social justice course.
Yeah.
So for me, and I run a program that is 40% students of color at a business school. And I am a business school professor. I am not a sociology professor where I was trained in this. I'm a business school professor, as you mentioned, trying to teach business skills to social justice students. Well, social justice students are particularly sensitive. But even today, that's not true. I mean, it doesn't make a difference what program you're in. If you're a teacher right now, the classroom is a risky place. It'll change. It's good. I mean, in the end, this will be a good change.
Yeah.
But this moment in time, I cannot, you know, going back to personalization, I cannot personalize a 75-person class.
Right.
Right. I always think about it. My class is 3 hours a week. This is my grad class. My undergrad class is 4 hours a week. So 4 hours a week times 15 weeks is 60 hours. Times 60 students is 3,600 hours of ear time. Just ear time, right? Meaning this is how many, and now the question is, can I possibly teach the 3,600 personalization required folks these days, because your books are brilliant in talking about that. Can I really do that in a way that doesn't offend one person in 3,600 hours of ear time in one sentence? I say a lot of sentences over 60 hours.
Yeah.
To 60 people.
Yeah.
One sentence, right? That offends one or two or three or five of these folks for whatever reason. You know, I always talk about, I teach, as an example, I teach about charter schools.
Interesting.
Right? Charter schools are a model that addressed, racism within the public school system. And there's always been a saying that's gone around the charter school world forever, which is that your ability to get a good education in America depends on what zip code you were born in.
Yeah.
Or the other line is, what exit off the highway are you? But now I have students in my class who graduated from those schools. So have I just insulted them? Have I just told their classmates that these students didn't learn? So now I don't talk about it anymore. I talk about it, but in a so different way, which is probably good. I was probably offending people before, but to have to think about the one sentence that I said that used to be a throwaway sentence.
Glenn and I have been talking a lot over the past few months, literally just about the fundamental importance of language, and not just as a superficial words matter, but like just literally that is the tool that we have to navigate this very complicated new environment or context that we're in. And I think that it's good that we're struggling. It shows me that we're not just admitting that there's been some serious bumps and shortfallings and inequalities in the past, but that in fact we're instead of just talking about those inequalities as something that's on the shelf, we're seeing it imbued in every word that we say, things that just come right out of our mouth, so that we know that actually there's stuff in there that I need to think through and to share out, to understand. And so I'm really excited about this terribly difficult challenge of really refocusing on the importance of language. And I think that what we're going to discover, one of the things that we're going to discover through this challenge is a more inclusive approach towards meeting those very students that you were just talking about that might have not necessarily always been coming to a program like yours, right? That really, that's the whole mission. If we have a better language, we're going to bring people like that to us and keep them with us in a way that the previous language just is going to put a line in front of. I guess that wasn't a question. It's just I'm ready for this challenge, but I agree with you. It's frightening, and it's literally revolutionary.
It is. So I used to be very not proud of myself. I remember when I made the change that when I would talk about a CEO, I used to say the CEO, he did this. Yeah. And then I changed it to she or he did this, or just say she. And now I say she, he, or they did this. Right? So, I mean, I keep adding language to try to be more respectful to personalization.
So Adlai, much like you spent 50 hours taking a course on how to teach online, has it become a requirement to take a course on how to teach in the face of all of this social unrest?
Yes. But all of the research shows that the classes don't really work. Racial sensitivity. So we're trying to figure out how to bring diversity into a classroom. I've just started in my master's degree an entire syllabus audit. So I've now asked 9 professors to give me their syllabi that I'm going to give to our DEI folks to review.
Interesting.
And I know what the answer is going to be.
What's the answer?
The answer is going to be you don't have diverse readings. Okay. They're not being written about diverse people or by diverse people. Diverse people doesn't sound right. They're not being written by people who reflect our students. They're not, the cases that we're doing are not about students of color or people of color, because we're writing cases about the CEO of AT&T. Okay. And the CEO of AT&T has traditionally been a white male forever.
Yeah.
Right now, then we've gotten radical, and now we can write it about some women, even though women represent, 5% of CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, right? So even so, we're looking to see, do we have people of color that are writing the papers, that are that the cases are about, that are our speakers that we bring into class, and that are the professors who are teaching them in the first place. Right? So our students want to see themselves reflected in their learnings, right? Because up until now, it's only been white people that are reflected in the learning. And now we're bringing in first generation, we're bringing in people of color, and they're saying, great. So that now our job is to study about white people from white people, right? Yeah. Can't we have somebody somewhere? Now, the challenge is the pipeline, right? Yeah. We're having the same problem with recruiting diverse faculty, right? To have diverse faculty, we need more diverse PhDs, right? Which take 6 years to grow, right? A PhD.
By the way, Adlai, real quick, you sound like the healthcare industry that says, if we're going to get more Black or Hispanic doctors, it's going to take 30 years, but keep going.
Well, I don't think 30 years, but I do think that, one of the problems has been, it's this bit of a chicken and egg.
Right.
The reason that we don't have more diverse PhD candidates is because we don't have enough diverse professors to mentor the diverse PhD students. And and the truth is, there's an enormous amount of attention going on at this university, at our university, to, but the answer from whether it's true or not from the healthcare industry for us is, and it was brilliant. Michael Quick, when he was provost, said something at his inauguration speech. He said, when we're talking about more diverse faculty, we're not talking about recruiting diverse faculty from another university. He said, that isn't creating diversity. That's just changing diversity's address.
Yep. Yeah, that means trading dollars. It's like there's no growth.
Right, which means that we have to train people and educate folks into these positions. And as a university, that's our job.
Go ahead, Adlai. Go ahead.
Well, I will tell you that it's going to be harder and harder to train diverse faculty to become professors when our universities keep focusing on ROI. Because I can tell you that professorship is not an ROI career.
Right. And that was one of my concerns as I see it. It's not like it's a new thing. ROI is here, and that's the way it's talked about. That is how the admission cycle works, right? This is come to us, go through this box, and at the end, this is what you get. My biggest concern is that we're saying that by going with ROI, we're now student centric. But I think if we look at this on a meta level, what we realize is what Glenn would talk about is it's substitution thinking and not transformation thinking. As much as you don't like the transformation, Glenn, we're going to need some.
It's evolutionary thinking. We need to evolve, but keep going.
Well, the good news is evolution happens whether or not we try to do it, because that just is, right? You can't stop evolution or where it's going, and it's not for good or for bad. It definitely is. But from our species perspective, we can find ways to make perhaps our species and the species that count on us and the planet that counts on us in some ways much more harmonious, as opposed to fighting each other all the time or being extractive or exploitive. But when I go back to the ROI thing, what I'm thinking is that, what we're telling a student who isn't even in school yet is pick a major, pick a career. What are you going to do for the next 40 years? Now go get it.
When you're 17.
Right. And most majors that I talk to, my favorite major is undecided, because those are the most realistic students I've ever met. And those are the ones that I think are going to be happy doing what they're doing 4 years out, or, not 4 years, but after their 4 years in the program. And so for me, I get really nervous about ROI because we're basically trying to do this, the student-centric approach by saying, look, we're looking about your experience and what happens afterwards. Well, we're not even thinking about what's happening in the box. We're just pretending that by coming through and doing 4 years of X professional school, or maybe we can shorten it to 2, and then you can get out quicker with a different type of degree. We're talking about what's after the box, not what's in the box.
As I listen to both of you, and I have a question for both of you.
Wait, I'm going to stop you, Glenn.
Go ahead.
2 seconds. You used the word evolution before.
Yes.
The word right now is revolution. Evolution, for the younger generation, for people of color right now in this country, it ain't evolution. They're done with evolution. This is revolution.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that through this question I'm going to ask him.
Sure, sorry.
And thank you for stopping me. I love that about you, Adlai, because you always get me rethinking whether I'm asking you the right question. But why didn't we pay attention? Why didn't higher ed, let alone corporate America or healthcare, place a strategic bet on the cultural demographic shift 10 years ago? Why didn't we? Because I'm asking because I've been talking about the cultural demographic shift for a decade. And it's when large cultural segments of the population reach numbers sufficient enough to have a significant effect on what we do and how we act. You know what I was told 10 years ago? Everyone's going to assimilate. It's not going to make any difference. And that's the dangers of standardization. So now that this reality has finally hit us because of the social unrest that happened during a pandemic, which placed the spotlight on the topic, why were we not prepared for this? Because for me, it just seems so elementary that we would recognize that the people that would be paying us money would be people that would reflect a new demographic. Why didn't we pay attention to this? Because you know what I'm concerned about, Adelaide, and Scott, and I'll make one last comment. I'm concerned that the methods and measures and mechanics that are being used to make sure that we're all careful will further silo populations and further silo the student away from the center. Go ahead.
It's because we didn't found a diverse country 250 years ago. We founded a white Christian country. And every law and every policy has been written, and every institution has been filled with white Christian males, really. It was enough. I mean, think of the radicalness of when I started on Wall Street in 1980, there were no women, none, other than secretaries. The first female managing director at a Wall Street firm was 1986. I'm not talking about 1940, right? Like I tell people these things and they're like, oh, well, what are you, 110? And I'm like, no, I'm 60. And when I started my career, there were no women, right? Wow. And it was a fight. And now here we are and why do we have this government that we have, right? Why is some fascist possibly winning a second election, right? A fascist. Why? Because he's telling everybody, hey, everybody, if you haven't noticed, your white male Christian country is blowing up. And we're not ready to give up our country yet. Look, I'm a Jew. I know I've been a guest in this country my whole life, right? I mean, I pass, I'm white, but I certainly know, when what was it? Wherever that first giant protest was where they ran over whatever, right? The signs didn't say anti-Black. The signs were anti-Jewish. I get that I'm a guest in this country. Jews get it inherently because we've never been allowed to stay anywhere for 2,000 years. And we're certainly, a little over 1% of this country. We're loud, but we're nobody, right? So I think that, we are very aware that we've moved into a white Christian country. And now white Christians are going to have to realize that we don't live in a white Christian country, and we're not ready to give that up yet. They're not ready to give that up. And until they're ready to give that up and realize that, truthfully, here, I'll go back, Glenn. You know what you and I were talking about when we first met, 15 years ago and started hanging out? We were talking about selling products to Hispanics. That people didn't know how to sell products to Hispanics. That's what you and I started talking about in this conversation years ago, right? Was that, right? And that you should start a business doing that, teaching people how to sell. That's over. That feels like 50 years ago now, Glenn, that you and I had that conversation, doesn't it? But that was it. How did we start to get businesses to pay attention? Well, we told them there was some profit in it. Now, if we're going to start saying, well, USC is 15% first generation now to 20% in our admissions every year. And now they're going to start to say to them, hey, if you don't want to hire people of color, I don't know who you're hiring, because that's who we're graduating, right? So suddenly, if you want to make money, then you better be hiring. I do not believe that white Christians are going to do this out of the goodness of their heart. No way. Just like now with this revolution, they're doing it with a gun to their head. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But this is not, and they're not going down easy. Trump's ratings are not 12%. Trump's ratings are basically 50%. Right? And and what did we decide to run against him? Another moderate white male, Christian male.
So forgive me, Adlai, but I feel like you've politicized a simple question. Why?
No shit. Sorry.
What?
It's 2020, Glenn, and we're in the middle of a pandemic with a fascist government. I can't believe I politicized it.
But But why did we ignore this cultural demographic shift?
Well, it goes back to what Adlai said in the very beginning, right? When we were bringing in the economics and saying that economic human is not economic human, or at least it's a different economics than we were pretending to be. And the fear of making a bad decision, right, is far more innately just part of us than doing the right thing or not doing the wrong thing. Just by saying, nope, I refuse to engage. I see the same thing happen when I have students that are freaking out about majors or careers. They just don't make a choice because they don't want to make the wrong one.
Right.
Get them to their end of their sophomore year, and you just have to start breaking it down. And then finally, they find themselves in such a huge crisis that, boom, their head and their minds can open up beyond what they think that their parents think they should be, beyond what they think society thinks they should be, so they can earn a decent pay, so they can maybe have a family and maybe have a house, right? And instead, they just start with the question, so what do you really like doing? Talk to me about one class that you had a good time in your Gen Ed core curriculum. Tell me about one cool class that you had. And it usually is something that isn't a professional school kind of skills-oriented course. I mean, every course is skills-oriented now, but or at least should be. But that said, what's cool is that whenever I've had that conversation with the student that is just struggling to find any major, when we start talking about that one class that actually was kind of fun, if they can admit it, you just see it, like the weight starts to come off. And then the first question is, how would I explain this to my parents? And they start thinking through, okay, you can see that they're grabbing onto it because they're finally seeing a way out of this, but they're still afraid because, again, I want to make this. Now they know it's the right decision, but they don't want to make it because not making that decision keeps a lot of other ones possible. It's the paralysis of opportunity.
So let me ask this question then to both of you. Do you think that the way that higher education is reacting to social injustice is one of playing not to lose or playing to win?
I think my side, I think we were playing to win up until this year. And I think we're at a point this year where we're playing not to lose. Hopefully, this will create a more radical shift that'll allow us to continue playing to win with a better understanding of what winning is.
That's such a, you know what? I love that. Sorry, Scott, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's good. I just say an interesting, right back to that language. Winning is not what winning used to be. Economics is not what economics used to be. Profit is not what profit used to be. These are words that don't need to be just played around and slightly altered. They need to be just fundamentally restructured and perhaps even reinvented.
So now that we've got a former Wall Street executive with us, Scott, let's ask him. Define profit for us, Adlai.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a former Wall Street executive and I teach all this social investing. You know, I teach social impact in business. I think I'm a cynic, unfortunately. I'm a major cynic. I think profit is still profit. I think profit, while doing as little damage as possible, is starting to be a factor. That we can't no longer play that, you know, what is it? The old, you know, burn and pillage. That's less possible these days. But profit's still profit. I start the day reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal and the New York Times paint two big different pictures of America. You know, I don't watch Fox News, which would paint an entire other, or CNN, which paints its own. But the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, you would think that you live in two different countries. But essentially, the New York Times talks about a country that's in turmoil, and the Wall Street Journal talks about that August is going to turn into the best month in the stock market in years. And because profit is profit, Glenn.
But so profit's profit, but we've already said that it has changed in some ways, right? And you said, so I'm trying to think of maybe a metaphor, or not a metaphor, but a parallel with, say, ecology and environmentalists that when we saw that we were able to use essentially profit, P&L, to convince corporations and corporate leadership, it's actually in your best long-term interest to go ahead and be part of this, right? And then we did see people starting to do some different kind of ecologically sensible things. Not that it fixed everything, but we did see a movement. And what we often talk about when we get frustrated, that's mainly just a bunch of substitutional thinking or just a bunch of performative thinking, the way that we sometimes see diversity used. We call that greenwashing. So you're not really changing anything. You're just you're washing it green so that it just looks better. And so what I'm hearing from you is that profit may be changing in terms of the way that we might be packaging it and showing it. But what I think I'm hearing from you is that at its core, right, at its essence, it is not changing one bit.
I think what's changing is at what cost?
At what cost? Can you explain that a little bit more? I think I get you, but I want to hear Adlai's words on this.
Well, I just think that, we can no longer ruin the environment. Profit's still profit, but can we still profit at the cost of the environment? That's becoming less capable. Can we still profit at, I would argue, can we still profit at the expense of people? Mm. Okay. So who's the richest person in the world right now? By numbers that are ridiculous, is Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos has made every single penny on the back of people. And we're still buying Amazon every day. If 4 packages don't show up on my front desk every day, I've done a bad job. Right? Like I open the door, I don't check my mail, but I check my Amazon packages. Yet it's all on the backs of people. Yeah. We're letting him get away with it, right? We're not taking him down, right? We're not actually, I've asked my students, they don't boycott. That's over. I don't get it, but we're protesting, and protest is great, and I love it, but it's about economics, right? Until these white Christian males feel it in their pocketbook. And the question is, for me, that I keep asking is, what happens then? Right? There are 2 things that they can do then. One thing is the right thing. We'll wrap this up, Glenn, by going back to the very beginning, right? If this affects profits, there's 2 choices that they can do. One, they can do the right thing, right? Diversify their what's it called? Pay people a living wage, diversify, start to train, invest in the future of what's the future of America.
Right.
Or they can do the wrong thing and vote for Trump and write a lot of checks to Trump and say, we're going to vote for the guy who's going to keep the minorities down. We're going to vote for the guy who understands that they're the enemy, not the future. Right? And that's their choices, which is not, in my opinion, not doing the right thing. Right? Even if it's not about Trump, even if it's just about, we're just going to hold on to our seats as long as we can. Then that's the other option, right? Do the right thing, don't do the wrong thing.
Well, I'll just say, can I keep them on the future thing real quick, and then I'll bow out, right? Because one thing that we've not really talked about directly is, we talked about sort of transforming and transitioning in new moments. The person on the Zoom call with us is a master of transition and transformation, right? And so from
Glenn.
From Wall Street to Chrysalis, from Chrysalis to academia.
That's right.
And as somebody that's done this transformation and felt the pulls and the pushes and all that, I'm curious, Adlai, what are you feeling right now in terms of the pulls and the pushes with regard to this, probably not even your 3rd chapter, but the 3rd chapter I know about with academia? Are you long for the academic world, or are you starting to feel a new chrysalis emerge?
Wow, great question.
Plead the 5th.
Nice. I know what that means.
It means, look, my whole career has been about, since I left Wall Street, and even to some extent on Wall Street, has been about leverage.
Okay.
What job do I fit in? What career do I fit in? where my particular skill set, my particular things that are unique to me can have the greatest impact, right? I was born with a set of skills that made success on Wall Street perfectly easy. I passed for white, have a high IQ, I can bullshit, all of it. And then I said, well, how can I leverage? So I ran a homeless agency saying, well, I can leverage those same skills in a different way. And then I said, well, now I have this very unique background, right? Undergrad in econometrics, graduate MBA from Wharton, 18 years on Wall Street, more capitalist than most capitalists will ever be. I did working on Skid Row. I learned about social enterprise. And then I was one of the few people that I could even think of who could then walk in with that background, walk into a university and say, I have no PhD. I've never worked at a university before. I haven't taught before. Let me go start an entire program.
Awesome.
Right? But who else was going to pull that off? Right? It was like, I have this thing. So now my question is I continue to question all the time, if I want to make a positive difference in the world, where is my most leverage? Okay. I believe, and then I'm talking too much. I believe there are two jobs for managers. Well, I don't know how long we have. That there are two jobs for managers, right? One job is somebody calls me one day and says, hey, Adlai, we've got 10,000 cats running around this neighborhood. I need you to get rid of those cats, like get them off the streets. And I go, I love it. Like that is a job for me. I am going to form a brilliant team of people who have all the skills necessary. I'm going to gather them up. I'm going to get them all psyched up. We're going to do planning 24 hours a day. We're going to get this happening. And one weekend, we're all going to get together. We're going to wear matching T-shirts. And we are going to get 10,000 cats in that parking lot. And then I come in on Monday and they go, great job, Adlai. Now your job for the rest of your life is to keep those cats in the parking lot. And I go, no, that's not my job. That's some process guy. Let the process person, let that person do that. That's not me. So the question is always for me has been when do I get to the point where I have to turn into a traditional manager rather than a builder, an entrepreneur? And then you have to sort of say, and then I have to say to myself, is it time to build something new? Because you work at a university. Universities, I would say I had my 5-year review of my center, right? 3 professors came in and spent days with us reviewing everything about what we do. This was a big deal, right? The 5-year review of the center, all of it. And the answer that they came out was, they're doing way too much. Adlai's going to burn out. They're doing too much. I was like, that's a thing. That's not a thing. Only a university would say that thing. Can you imagine a business saying, sorry, Adlai, you're making too much money. You're growing your department too fast. Just slow down a little bit. So I think, I met with somebody the other day who said, what are your plans? He asked me to write down my plans going forward. And by the end of my 2nd page, he was like, I didn't even read your 3rd. Like, you just can't do all this. So what are you going to give up? Like, why are you doing all this? So I don't know. It might be at a university. It might not be. But cool. I'm 61. I think I got another chapter. It might be at the university.
Your example totally explains why, while the professionalization of schools is important to learn certain skills, it's what you came into that professional school with that turned out to be what got you where you are and to allow you to do what you did. And I just love that again, we're understanding the importance of the individual, right? Their upkeep before the day they even get to college. There's things that are already pre-cooked, and we can embrace that. And we can find ways to help people find themselves so they can apply and leverage themselves and their talents uniquely, not into a box called accounting or anthropology, but human. Anyway, what do you think?
I will say, though, that the difference is that for first generation Americans going into college right now, going to accounting school is what's going to lift them and their family out of poverty.
Okay.
So that their kids can study whatever they want.
Good point.
I think that the one place where I really change my tone is when it comes to first generation students. Socioeconomically, students who haven't typically gone to college. There, I'm buying into the ROI model 100%. Same as Glenn's father, God bless him, may he rest in peace, and my parents made did that work for us so that I had the luxury of choice. And I think that right now that ROI model works very well for them. I don't think it works. I don't think it's a good idea for a university as a whole, but I think we do have to understand that, yes, the luxury of doing what I love, but that isn't a luxury. That's a luxury.
That is
what I love. It is.
I think I'd like to wrap up kind of putting all this together and saying that you are an example of an individual who leveraged their individual capacity. There were moments in your life where you decided to pivot. You knew if you were doing right or wrong. You knew that there was something more and better for you that would benefit the healthier whole. And that's why you've been an inspiration for me, Adlai. I mean, I can say publicly with a tremendous amount of gratitude that it's because of you that I'm at where I'm at today. So because you kept pushing and pushing and pushing, because you did the same thing to yourself. And you said earlier on in the conversation that your kids are really progressive and that they're thinkers, and you're learning from them just as much as they're learning from you. It's like the role is reversed. All I want to say as we wrap up is I believe that there's another chapter in your life, and the moment calls for you and what you have to offer more than ever before. So I'm with you there, brother, and I love you a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time. And I know you don't like it when I talk like this about you, but you're an inspiration, man. And,
well, I'm just waiting around. You've never offered me a job, Glenn. So. And I will say that as I look at my books, unfortunately, I'm not at the university where my office there, where most of my books are. Still, my most treasured are the ones you've signed for me. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Adlai.
Scott, it was great to talk to you, Glenn.
Great to know you.
I love you.
You're unbelievable. And by the way, just want to remind our listeners that Adlai will be one of the featured speakers at the 2020 Leadership in the Age of Personalization virtual summit that'll take place October 28th through the 30th. And as we always say when we end the show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you so much, Adlai.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.